Welcome to this presentation celebrating the beauty of Alaska as we discover Alaska with John Muir. John Muir, this incredible naturalist we're going to learn a little bit about today and his great adventures and writings about Alaska, almost single-handedly his explorations and then publicity of the beauty of the scenery and the environment and the wildlife of Alaska sparked what has become the tourism trade in Alaska. He wrote such beautiful passages as this.
The great wilderness of Alaska, with its lofty mountains laden with glaciers and snow, its deep, in-reaching fjords and flowery plains, and its boundless wealth of evergreen forests and islands, and shining, singing waters, offers a glorious field for lovers of fountain beauty, much of which is now within easy reach of the ordinary traveler.
As you can tell, he wrote these vivid, beautiful descriptions of the majesty and the beauty of the great land. I kind of put John Muir in context for you this way. Think of Thoreau as the voice of Walden Pond. Think of Mark Twain as the voice of the Mississippi River. Well, John Muir is the voice of Alaska. He wrote a bunch of wonderful articles, newspaper and magazine articles, and books about this place. Our copy of Travels in Alaska has become a well-worn friend that travels with us always. Throughout his beautiful descriptions, he seemed to add his own personal philosophy that traveling to Alaska was not just a journey, it was a pilgrimage. And in my opinion, this is how I sum up John Muir. He had an incredible passion for the present moment. He had an amazing gratitude for whatever experience he was experiencing, and he had an incredible reverence for the sacredness of nature. In an October the 7th, 1874 letter to his mentor and friend Jean Carr, he wrote,
"Civilization and fever and all the morbidness that has been hooted at me have not dimmed my glacial eye, and I care to live only to entice people to look at nature's loveliness."
It's almost like his mission statement, and he certainly accomplished it throughout the course of his life. Let us introduce John Muir to you. John Muir was born April the 21st, 1838 in Dunbar, Scotland. At age 11, his family moved to America and settled in Wisconsin. He began to travel and work, and he fell in love with nature. In 1867, just after the Civil War, he had an accident at work. He was temporarily blinded while working at a carriage parts shop. He did regain his sight several weeks later, but that experience kind of motivated him to follow his dreams and to do what he really wanted to do. He became an ardent traveler. He traveled all across the United States, to Cuba, to Panama, the West Coast. He became a very accomplished botanist, geologist, naturalist, conservationist, a true Renaissance man. He visited California, explored into the Yosemite area, all through the High Sierras. He's credited with discovering 65 different glaciers in that region. He would wander for miles and miles and camp for weeks and weeks. In 1880, after exploring the western part of the United States' wild places, John Muir married Louis Wanda Strentzel. She was the daughter of a Martinez, California fruit rancher. And Muir moved to their beautiful home and learned the family fruit business. And he managed the property for 10 years, from 1880 to 1890. Now, Louis was a staunch supporter of his writing endeavors and his love of nature. They had a lovely family, 2 daughters, Wanda and Helen. And finally, by 1890, Muir was able to pass the management of the fruit operation over to his brother David, and the income gave him an opportunity to really have some independence and pursue his interests. He began to travel, study, and write, and boy, did he write. More than 300 articles for newspapers and periodicals. He wrote a whole collection of books, and America really saw their resources as an economic entity. But John Muir encouraged them to perceive them as an entity for preservation, to be cherished and to be held. He realized that everyone has a need for beauty, and he wrote this.
Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play and pray in, where nature may heal and cheer and give strength to the body and soul alike.
When the Sierra Club was formed in 1892, John Muir agreed to serve as its president, and he did so until his death in 1914. He became an incredible advocate also for national parks. He's often referred to as the father of the national park system. As a matter of fact, President Grover Cleveland drew on Muir's work to establish 13 forest reserves and what became the United States Forest Service. Muir was directly involved in establishing Yosemite, Sequoia, Mount Rainier, and Grand Canyon national parks. In his 1901 book, Our National Parks, that wonderful tome attracted the attention of President Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt came to California to meet Muir in 1903, and the two camped together in Yosemite. This is pre-Secret Service. Can you imagine these two guys? I would love to have been just hovering in the background, listening to those conversations. This meeting and his work inspired Teddy Roosevelt to establish 148 million acres of national forest, 5 additional national parks, and 23 national monuments, including one that would be named for Muir Woods, just north of San Francisco.
Beautiful place.
Pretty special place, that's for sure. Well, John Muir passed away on December the 24th of 1914 at age 76 in Los Angeles, California. He left behind an incredible legacy. Robert Underwood Johnson spoke at his funeral and said this: "He was a practical man, a faithful citizen, scientific observer, a writer of enduring power with vision, poetry, courage in a contest, a heart of gold, and a spirit pure and fine." That's a pretty good life summary right there. John Muir was such a part of California's history that when California issued their souvenir coin, John Muir was put there on the back, immortalizing him even more. John Muir traveled, as I mentioned, extensively. He went literally all around the world. Australia, Africa, Alaska, New Zealand, Canada, China, Japan, India, Egypt, Central and South America, Russia, Siberia. But the place that he loved the most was Alaska. In the last 2 decades of the 1800s, John Muir traveled to Alaska 7 different times. He would travel by steam, a ship, all the way up to Wrangell, and then from there he traveled in dugout canoes with native Alaskans from the local Tlingit tribe. They would guide him over 800 miles round trip by canoe. He visited Glacier Bay. He also had a chance to travel much of Tracy Arm, Endicott Arm. He climbed mountains and glaciers, but he also visited by luxury ships. From dugout canoes to luxury ships, in 1881, he spent 5 months aboard a rescue vessel called the Corwin. And in 1899, the railroad tycoon from the Union Pacific, Edward Harriman, put together a luxury nature adventure that John Muir tagged along on. So he saw Alaska in a lot of different styles and a lot of different ways. He had an incredible passion for this land, and he wrote this:
"How delightful it is, and how it makes one pulses bound to get back into this reviving Northland wilderness. How truly wild it is, and how joyously one's heart responds to the welcome it gives. Its waters and mountains shining and glowing like enthusiastic human faces."
John Muir learned quickly that every moment in Alaska is an adventure, every excursion is a delight. He wrote this: "Every excursion I have made in all my rambling life has been fruitful and delightful, from the smallest indefinite saunter of an hour or 2 in length to the noblest summer flight." That was from John of the Mountains. John Muir was renowned to be a very hardy and tough guy. I love this quote. After my 12-mile walk, I ate a cracker and planned the camp. To me, that just kind of sums John Muir up. His energy seemed boundless. His fascination was often so constant that sleep eluded him. He wrote this, after wrapping myself in my blankets, I still gazed into the marvelous sky and made out to sleep only about 2 hours. Then, without waking the noisy sleepers, I arose, ate a piece of bread, set out in my shirt sleeves, determined to make the most of the time at my disposal. Regardless of his surroundings, regardless of his companions, or what comfort he had, each day was an adventure and an opportunity for discovery. He continued, the next morning was cloudy and windy, snowy and cold, dreary December weather in August, and I gladly ran out to see what I might learn. Cruising through the Inside Passage is absolutely a spectacular experience. John Muir described it this way.
Gazing from the deck of the steamer, one is borne smoothly over calm blue waters. Through the midst of countless forest-clad islands, we seemed to float in true fairyland. Each succeeding view seemed more and more beautiful. The one we chanced to have before us, the most surprisingly beautiful of all, tracing shining ways through fjord and sound, past forests and waterfalls, islands and mountains, and far azure headlands. It seemed as if surely we must at length reach the very paradise of the poets, the abode of the blessed.
The Inside Passage is a journey that stretches basically from about Seattle, Washington, all the way up to Skagway, Alaska. And that journey of about 1,000 miles is through sheltered waters. There's an enormous island chain that stretches right along there and kind of keeps the water nice and calm behind those islands. Beautiful cruising, great scenery to enjoy on both sides. And again, Muir gives us this account.
The channels, canals, sounds, passages, and fjords form an intricate web of land and water, fringing the lofty icy chain of coastal mountains with infinite variety. The general pattern is harmonious throughout its whole extent of nearly 1,000 miles. Here you glide into a narrow channel, hemmed in by mountain walls, forested down to the water's edge, where there is no distant view, and your attention is concentrated on the objects close about you. The crowded spires of the spruces and the hemlocks rising higher and higher on the steep green slopes, stripes of paler green where winter avalanches have cleared away the trees, allowing grasses and willows to spring up, zigzags of cascades appearing and disappearing among the bushes and trees. The steamer is often so near the shore that new scenes are brought to view with magical rapidity.
Gorgeous views right from the deck of the ship. If you never get off of the ship on an Alaskan cruise, you're going to have an amazing experience. John Muir is traveling on the steamer with a bunch of tourists, and they're all headed to see the great land and move up that direction. And he writes this. The steamer arrived with 230 tourists. What a show they made with their ribbons and Kodaks. All seemed happy and enthusiastic, though it was curious to see how promptly all of them ceased gazing when the dinner bell rang.
It's like that always.
That is true. Human nature, that's for sure. Scenery can wait. I'm hungry. Well, it is truly just incredibly beautiful scenery. The scale of it, the diversity of it just seems to boggle your mind and just fill your heart with awe. John Muir gave us this wonderful passage.
The enchanted land of lake and fjord, forest and waterfall, mountain and island begins to appear in full force. It seems as if surely following this shining way, we should finally reach heaven. What can the heart of man conceive more divine?
In the evening, after witnessing the unveiling of the majestic peaks and glaciers and their baptism in the downpouring sunbeams, it seemed inconceivable that nature could have anything finer to show us.
No words can convey anything like an adequate conception of its sublime grandeur. The noble simplicity and fineness of the sculpture of the walls, their magnificent proportions, their cascades, gardens, and forest adornments, the placid fjord between them, the great white and blue ice wall, and the snow-laden mountains beyond.
Gliding along the shores of its network of channels, we may travel thousands of miles without seeing any mark of man. The forests are as trackless as the sky, while the mountains, wrapped in their snow and ice and clouds, seem never before to have been even looked at.
As we floated happily on over the shining waters, the beautiful islands in ever-changing pictures were an unfailing source of enjoyment, but chiefly our attention was turned upon the mountains.
One of his books was titled John of the Mountains. He was a mountaineer at heart, and boy did he love Alaska as a result. 39 mountain ranges containing 17 of the 20 highest peaks in the United States, 5 of the 7 highest in North America, and he wrote this. Cares of every kind were quickly forgotten. Every face glowed with natural love of wild beauty. The islands were seen in long perspective, their forests dark green in the foreground with varying tones of blue growing more and more tender in the distance, bays full of hazy shadows graduating into open silvery fields of light, and lofty headlands with fine arching insteps dipping their feet in the shining water. But every eye was turned to the mountains.
The mountain rises in rather steep slopes, covered with a luxuriant growth of bushes, grasses, flowers, and a few trees, chiefly spruce and fir, the most beautiful I think I have ever seen.
Covering much of these mountains, especially at the lower elevation, is an adornment of beautiful green forestation. As a matter of fact, southeast Alaska along the cruise routes where most of the cruises travel includes the Chugach and Tongass National Forests, which total together almost 24 million acres of forest land right along the coastline. Muir wrote this, "The clearest way into the universe is through a forest wilderness. The rain brought out the fragrance of the drenched trees, and the wind made wild melody in their tops. The airy, feathery, brownish-green Alaska cedar, the outer fringe of bushes along the shore and hanging over the brows of the cliffs, the white mountains above, the shining water beneath, the changing sky over all, form pictures of divine beauty in which no healthy eye may ever grow weary." I love that. No healthy eye may ever grow weary soaking in the beauty of Alaska. And as magnificent as the scenery is, and it is, there always seems to be one feature in Alaska I find, for many people, steals the show. And that is the awe-inspiring sight of Alaska's whales. The whales are the stars, and Muir wrote this.
I noticed one of the small whales that frequent these channels and mentioned the fact, then called attention to a charming group of islands, but they turned their eyes from the islands saying, yes, yes, they are very fine, but where did you see the whale?
Seeing the whale is always key. He describes a handful of whales in a beautiful fashion. Let me share this one with you. And yonder, glistening amid the irised spray, a half-dozen whales, their broad backs like glaciated bosses of granite, heaving aloft in near view, spouting lustily, drawing a long breath, and plunging down home in colossal health and comfort. Think of the hearts of these whales beating warm against the sea day and night through dark and light, on and on. How the red blood must rush and gurgle in and out, bucketfuls, barrelfuls at a beat.
Wow.
Not only the whales, many other marine wildlife. He wrote about seeing an incredible school of porpoises.
A merry school of porpoises, a square mile of them, suddenly appear, tossing themselves into the air in abounding strength and hilarity, adding foam to the waves and making all the wilderness wilder.
Well, John Muir, on his first journey to Alaska in 1879, rode a steamship as far north as it traveled, which was to Wrangell, Alaska, in the very southeast southern part of Alaska. And there he met a Presbyterian missionary that had been stationed in that isolated spot, a man by the name of S. Hall Young. Young would later write a book called Alaska Days with John Muir, and he describes meeting Muir. A hearty grip of the hand, and we seem to coalesce in a friendship which, to me at least, has been one of the very best things in a life full of blessings. They steamed up the Stikine River to Glenora in British Columbia to see the glaciers there, and Muir wanted to climb Mount Glenora, but the ship was only going to be docked there overnight. But the captains agreed that if Muir could be back by the morning, he would wait until he got back aboard. So Muir decided to take an evening climb up this incredible mountain. Now, Young wants to go along. So Muir finally agrees, and they climbed and did pretty well. But near the summit, way up high, Young slipped, grabbed the edge of the ledge to catch himself, and in so doing dislocated both his arms. Oh man. So Muir strapped his arms to his side, took that man and helped him down through those craggy cliffs bit by bit. At times, the trail hugging sheer cliffs was so tight that he had to really hold on to him by getting behind him on the cliff, getting Young's coat in his teeth to hold on to him and to maneuver him along the line. Young described a little bit of this when he wrote this.
All that night, this man of steel and lightning worked, never resting a minute, doing the work of 3 men, helping me along the slopes, easing me down the rocks, pulling me up cliffs, dashing water on me when I grew faint with pain, and always cheery, full of talk and anecdote, cracking jokes with me, infusing me with his own indomitable spirit. Oh, he does sound like a Superman.
He does. He's a little bit of a superhero. He really is. Well, they are traveling on their canoe trip with native Alaskans who are going to be their guides when they head out. Such a kindliness and serene good nature that they had about them that Muir was so impressed with. He's going to visit many different native Alaskan communities. He shares wonderful insights of accounts of their lives, their traditions, their relationships, and he peered keenly into the culture of these warm and welcoming and fascinating people. He described it this way. The fine, strong, and specious deliberation of Indians was well illustrated on this eventful trip. It was fresh every morning. They all behaved well, however, exerted themselves under tedious hardship without flinching for days or weeks at a time, never seemed in the least nonplussed, were prompt to act in every exigency, good as servants, fellow travelers, and even as friends. From Wrangell, they will travel on about an 800-mile round trip through the Inside Passage by native Alaskan canoe. They traveled, they traded, they fished all along the coastline, and these canoes were so well built that it enabled the natives to have the ability to really migrate up and down the shoreline in search of food or resources or even just socially. They often moved about in these large, ornate canoes, and John Muir described it this way.
As the day advances, a fleet of canoes may be seen along the shore, all fashioned alike, high and long, beak-like prows, and sterns with lines as fine as those of the breast of a duck. What the Mustang is to the Mexican vaquero, the canoe is to these coastal Indians. They skim along the shore to fish and hunt and trade, or merely to visit their neighbors, for they are sociable and have family pride remarkably well developed, meeting often to inquire after each other's health, attend potlatches and dances, and gossip concerning marriages, births, deaths, etc. Others seem to sail for the pure pleasure of the thing. Their canoes are decorated with handfuls of these tall purple flowers. Yonder goes a whole family, grandparents and all, making a direct course for some favorite stream and campground. They're going to gather berries, as the baskets will tell.
One of the chiefs they met along the way, I thought, summarized to Muir the natives' wish regarding their interaction with the whites. I thought this was great. The chief said this: "We have not much to say to you fellows. We always do to Boston men as we have done to you. Give a little of whatever we have. Treat everybody well and never quarrel. This is all we have to say." They were wonderful people and developed a great relationship with Muir along the way. He was even ceremonially made a member of one of the tribes. And their character, their integrity, their culture, their relationships were fascinating to Muir. And he gave us this account.
An old cross-looking wrinkled crone presided at the steaming chowder pot, and as she peeled the potatoes with her fingers, she, at short intervals, quickly thrust one of the best into the mouth of a little wild-eyed girl that crouched beside her, a spark of natural love which charmed her withered face and made all the big, gloomy house shine.
I think Muir felt a great connection with the natives because they shared a recognition of the beauty and the power and the significance of nature. He wrote this: "To the Indian mind, all nature was instinct with deity. A spirit was embodied in every mountain, stream, and waterfall. Along their great canoe adventure, all the way up the Lynn Canal to a native village near where a town called Haines, Alaska is today, they began to hear information from the natives in that area that just around the corner, so to speak, not far away, there was a great bay filled with glaciers, some of them flowing right down to meet the ocean water. Muir had to see it. He was fascinated with glaciation and believed glaciers were the primary energy that had carved much of the landscape. But this was already October, and the weather is really turning wild and stormy and cold. So Muir hired a local native to guide them into the stormy bay full of glaciers, and the guide's wife met them down at the canoe and expressed her concern for her husband's safety. Muir recorded it this way:
"I promised to pay well for a guide, and in order to lighten the canoe, proposed to leave most of our heavy stores in the hut until our return. After a long consultation, one of them consented to go. His wife got ready his blanket and a piece of cedar matting for his bed and some provisions. She followed us to the beach, and just as we were pushing off, said with a pretty smile, 'It is my husband you are taking away. See that you bring him back.'"
See that you bring him back. Well, this is an enormous bay. It had been one giant ice field that had come all the way down to the ocean. And then over the course of less than 200 years, it will erode back and back as the seawater melts that ice as the two make contact. The glacier retreated further up that bay as the ocean water moves in. It now stretches over 60 miles from where that ice originally had been. This, of course, is what we call Glacier Bay. And John Muir, seeing it for the first time, seemed overcome. He wrote this: "At length the clouds lifted a little, and beneath their gray fringes I saw the berg-filled expanse of the bay, and the feet of the mountains that stand about it, and the imposing fronts of 5 huge glaciers. This was my first general view of Glacier Bay, a solitude of ice and snow and newborn rocks, dim, dreary, and mysterious." He goes on to continue this way:
"Sunshine streamed through the luminous fringes of the clouds and fell on the green waters of the fjord, the glittering bergs, the crystal bluffs of the vast glacier, the intensely white, far-spreading fields of ice, and the effable, chaste, and spiritual heights of the Fairweather Range, which were now hidden, but then partly revealed, the whole making a picture of icy wildness, unspeakably pure and sublime.
Here's another entry of his account. The view that was unfolded fixed every eye in wondering admiration. No written words, however bonded together, can convey anything like an adequate conception of its sublime grandeur. The noble simplicity of the fineness of the sculpture of the wall, their magnificent proportions, their cascade garden and forest adornments, the placid water between them, the great white ice wall stretching across the middle, and the snow-laden mountain peaks beyond. Still more impotent are words in telling the peculiar awe one experiences in entering these virgin mansions of the icy north. Notwithstanding, it is only the perfectly natural effect of simple and appreciable manifestations of the presence of God. As a glacier grinds down that mountain, it is churning up the earth and soil and stone down below, grinding up what is known as a moraine. And here you get a chance to see the ice moving here with an enormous pile of dirt that is piled up out in front of it. In Alaska, here in Glacier Bay, this is Marjorie Glacier that we pull in to visit. However, over here is the Grand Pacific Glacier, all filled with moraine dirt. You can hardly even tell it's a glacier. It's so filled with earth and rocks and stones that it's ground up along its way on its river of ice down to meet the ocean. John Muir gives us this account.
And here, too, one easily learns that the world, though made, is yet being made. That this is still the morning of creation. That mountains long conceived are now being born, brought to light by the glaciers, channels traced for rivers, basins hollowed for lakes. That moraine soil is being ground and outspread for coming plants. Coarse boulders and gravel for the forest, finer meal for grasses and flowers, while the finest, water-bolted portion of the grist, seen hastening far out to sea, is being stored away in the darkness and builded particle on particle, cementing and crystallizing to make the mountains and valleys and plains of other landscapes, which, like fluent pulsing water, rise and fall and pass on through the ages in endless rhythms and beauty.
As a glacier, a river of ice, meets the ocean, that warmer salt water begins to undercut the face of the glacier until finally the weight just simply collapses and it calves or breaks off into the sea, leaving floating chunks of ice known as icebergs. Here's John Muir. But when we approached the base of a majestic rock and came in sight of another grand glacier of the first order, sending off bergs, our joy was complete. I had a most glorious view of it, sweeping in grand ease and majesty from the deep, inaccessible mountains where its fountains are laid, swaying around one mighty bastion after another until at length it falls into the fjord in shattered, overleaning fragments which, when set free, become bergs and so waste again to water. Here's another entry from Muir.
When sunshine is sifting through the midst of the multitude of icebergs that fill the fjord, and through the jets of radiant spray ever rising from the tremendous splashing of the falling and upspringing bergs, the effect is indescribably glorious.
As stunning as Glacier Bay is, and Muir fell in love with it, it seemed that the wide open bay was one experience, versus Tracy Arm Fjord being a narrow, long, linear, glacier-filled avenue was a completely different experience. And when John Muir visited Tracy Arm, he wrote this: "No ice work that I have ever seen surpasses this, either in the magnitude of the features or effectiveness of composition. Glaciers are seen still busily engaged in the work of completing their sculpture. Probably the drainage of 50 or more pours into this fjord. The water spaces between the bergs were as smooth as glass, reflecting the unclouded sky and doubling the ravishing beauty of the bergs as the sunlight streamed through their innumerable angles in rainbow colors. Any rainfall or glacial melt in Alaska produces incredible waterfalls. Thousands of them along the coastline of Alaska, and John Muir gives us a beautiful account here.
All these water streams were riding on the parent ice stream, their voices joined in one grand anthem, telling the wonders of their near and far off fountains.
Here's another account. Strange, how strange is this untamed, untouched solitude of the wild, free bosom of Alaska, yet how eternally and necessarily familiar. Then through all, penetrating, saturating all, is the awful, hushing, sweet-voiced monotone of the stream, like the very voice of God humanized and terrestrialized. John Muir wrote a lot about Alaska. One of his most famous accounts was from a time when he traveled with an unusual companion. This is from 1880, when he returns to Alaska for his second trip. Again at Wrangell, he meets S. Hall Young, the missionary, who's going to travel with him. This time, Hall wants to bring along his dog, who is named Stikine. Now, Muir argued against this. Hall Young's wife argued against this. But apparently the dog had other ideas. He wrote this.
It was Stikine himself who really decided the question whether we should take him with us on this trip. He listened to the discussion, pro and con, as he stood with me on the wharf, turning his sharp, expressive eyes and sensitive ears up to me or down to Muir in the canoe. When the argument seemed to be going against the dog, he suddenly turned, deliberately walked down the gangplank to the canoe, picked his steps carefully to the bow, where my seat with Muir was arranged, and curled himself down on my coat. The discussion was ended abruptly in a general laugh, and Stikine went along.
Well, during this trip, early one morning, Muir rises early while everyone else is still sleeping to go out climbing. He's going to climb the Taylor Glacier, now known as the Brady Glacier, and the dog could not be convinced to stay in the camp. So finally, Muir let him come along with him, and mayhem ensued. This one's a few paragraphs long. I think it's worth it. Let me tell you the story of Stikine. I came to a maze of crevasses of appalling depth and width, which could not be passed apparently either up or down. I traced them with firm nerve developed by the danger, making wide jumps, poising cautiously on dizzy edges after cutting footholds, taking wide crevasses at a grand leap, at once frightful and inspiring. Many a mile was thus traveled, mostly up and down the glacier, making but little real headway, running much of the time as the danger of having to pass the night on the ice becoming more and more imminent. This I could do, though with the weather and my rain-soaked condition, it would be trying at best. In treading the mazes of this crevassed section, I had frequently to cross bridges that were only knife edges for 20 or 30 feet, cutting off the sharp tops and leaving them flat so that Stikine could follow me. All this time, the little dog followed me bravely, never hesitating on the brink of any crevasse that I had jumped. But now that it was becoming dark and the crevasses became more troublesome, he followed close at my heels. No land was now in sight. The mist fell lower and darker, and snow began to fly. I could not see far enough up and down the glacier to judge how best to work out of the bewildering labyrinth, and how hard I tried while there was yet hope of reaching the camp that night, a hope which was fast growing dim like the sky. Many times I was put to my mettle, but with a firm braced nerve, all the more unflinching as the dangers thickened, I worked out of that terrible ice web, and with blood fairly up, Stikine and I ran over common danger without fatigue. I dug a low groove in the rounded edge for my knees to rest in, and leaning over began to cut a narrow foothold on the steep, smooth side. When I was doing this, Stikeen came up behind me, pushed his head over my shoulder, looked into the crevasses and along the narrow knife edge, then turned and looked in my face, muttering and whining as if to say, "Surely you are not going down there." I said, "Yes, Stikeen, this is the only way." He then began to cry and ran wildly along the rim of the crevasse, searching for a better way. Then, returning baffled, of course, he came behind me and lay down and cried louder and louder. After going away as if I was leaving him, he still howled and cried without venturing to try to follow me. Returning to the edge of the crevasse, I told him that I must go, that he could come if he only tried. And finally, in despair, he hushed his cries, slid his little feet slowly down into my footsteps out on the big sliver, walked slowly and cautiously along the sliver as if holding his breath, while the snow was falling and the wind was moaning and threatening to blow him off. He looked up along the row of notched steps I had made, as if fixing them in his mind. Then, with a nervous spring, he whizzed up and past me and out onto the level ice, and ran and cried and barked and rolled about fairly hysterical in the sudden revulsion from depth of despair to triumphant joy. I tried to catch him and pet him and tell him how good and brave he was, but he would not be caught. He ran round and round, swirling like autumn leaves in an eddy, lay down and rolled head over heels. With trembling limbs, now that the danger was over, we staggered and stumbled down the bouldery edge of the glacier and got over the dangerous rocks by the cascades, while yet a faint light lingered.
Oh my goodness. What was Hall thinking? Where are those two?
Yeah, where are they gone to? I'm sure when they returned to camp, there was a good story to tell, that's for sure. Well, John Muir, as you can tell, loved being out in nature. He was a tremendous student, but boy did he love being out in the field. I, as a researcher and historian and writer, I like this next one. Muir wrote this: "I have a low opinion of books. They are piles of stones set up to show coming travelers where other minds have been. One day's exposure to mountains is better than a cartload of books." I think scenery, perhaps for all of us, has a sacredness, an inspiration that just seems to lift our spirits. And as maybe more adventurous things begin to fade as we get a little older, scenery always delivers. And John Muir wrote this:
"As age comes on, one source of enjoyment after another is closed, but nature's sources never fail. Like a generous host, she offers her brimming cups in endless variety, served in a grand hall, the sky its ceiling, the mountains its walls, decorated with glorious paintings, and enlivened with bands of music ever playing."
John Muir reminds me sometimes, I think I can be a fair weather nature person. I like it when everything's kind of perfect. John Muir had those kinds of days, and he gives us an account of what it's like enjoying Alaska on a good weather day. The clearest of Alaskan air is always appreciably substantial, so much so that it would seem as if one might test its quality by rubbing it between the thumb and finger. I never before saw summer days so white and so full of subdued luster.
This was towards the end of July, in the middle of a block of the very brightest and best of Alaska summer weather, when the mountains, towering sublimely in the gray pearl sky, had rest from storms, and the islands seemed to float and drowse in the glassy, sunny waters, their green shores keeping them raw and bare.
John Muir reminds us that nature has something to show us and to reveal to us no matter what the weather. The weather, he writes, was cloudy and rainy, but the scenery is delightful even in the dullest weather. The marvelous wealth of forests, islands, and waterfalls, the cloud-wreathed heights, the many avalanche slopes and slips, the pearl-gray tones of the sky, the browns of the woods, their purple flower edges and mist fringes, the endless combinations of water and land and ever-shifting clouds. So if it's inclement, it can still be wonderful. John Muir gives us this.
We arose next morning in newness of life. Never before had rocks and ice and trees seemed so beautiful and wonderful. Even the cold, biting rainstorm that was blowing seemed full of loving kindness, wonderful compensation for all that we had endured. And we sailed down the bay through the gray, driving rain, rejoicing. Hold on a second here. Really? I love that. The rainstorm, biting rainstorm blowing seemed to be full of loving kindness. Now that is a glass half full kind of guy.
Loving kindness, man.
Wow.
Sailed down the bay through the gray, driving rain, rejoicing.
We've been there though.
Yeah.
We've done that.
And it will. It'll get you. And when things all align and everything's perfect and the air and the sky is just right, there is no sunset, I believe, on earth more beautiful than an Alaskan sunset. And John Muir gives this beautiful account. The evening was calm, and the sunset colors came on gradually, increasing in extent and richness of tone by slow degrees, as if requiring more time than usual to ripen. There was a heavy cloud bank, deeply reddened on its lower edge and the projecting parts of its face. Below this were 3 horizontal belts of purple edged with gold, while a vividly defined spreading fan of flame streamed upward across the purple bars and faded in a feather edge of dull red. But the most novel and exciting effect was in the body of the atmosphere itself, which, laden with moisture, became one mass of color, a fine, translucent purple haze in which the islands with softened outlines seemed to float. Everything near and far, even the ship, was comprehended in the glorious picture and the general color effect. Oh, man. Good stuff. Well, John Muir, almost single-handedly, in these 7 expeditions and the voluminous amount of information that he would write and share with such beautiful prose, as you can tell, inspired travelers to come and see what Alaska was all about. Only 4 years after John Muir first visited Glacier Bay, cruises began traveling to bring. A cruise ship called the Idaho was the first to visit Glacier Bay in 1883, and this is the Idaho. I found a shot of it. This is docked in Juneau. Thought that was kind of cool. But whole lines began to pop up of tourist travel to see this incredible great land. Well, this is a beautiful place. And I want to remind you, if you want to learn even more about John Muir, I have an entire audio book entitled Discover Alaska with John Muir, where I took his travels in Alaska and kind of edited it down to the best of his writings. We have lots more of these type of programs over at historyhighlights.com. We'd love for you to come and explore even more of our stuff. We've got paperback books and ebooks and audiobooks and videos. We want to make sure we stay in touch and continue this journey of discovery together. But to wrap up, I thought maybe just 2 more of our favorite John Muir quotes to sum up these perfect memories of being in Alaska.
While we sail on and on through the infinite beauty enchanted, hard money gaining, material thoughts loosen and sink off and out of sight, and one is free from oneself and made captive to fresh wildness and beauty, obeying it as necessarily as unconscious sun-bathed plants. When the islands are swung in the air with edges dissolved, and outlines blurred in fairy features, then the enchantment is complete.
Here's one more. This fine mountain, glittering in its showy mail of snow and ice, together with 100 other peaks dipping into the blue sky, and every one of them telling the work of ice or fire in their forms and sculpture. These and the sparkling sea and long in-reaching fjords are a noble picture to add to the 1,000 others which have enriched our lives this summer in the great Northland. We hope that this journey of discovery has been a fulfilling and wondrous and inspiring experience for you. There is no place like Alaska, and I believe there may be no other writer quite like John Muir. On behalf of Laura and myself, we thank you for joining us.